الملائكة إلا بالحق وما كانوا إذا منظرين إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون ولقد أرسلنا من قبلك في شيع الأولين وما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون كذلك نسلكه في قلوب المجرمين لا يؤمنون به وقد خلت سنة الأولين ولو فتحنا عليهم بابا من السماء فظلوا فيه يعرجون
I'm going to hold back my question because for the moment I think we should set the scene. That's 1948. I'd like to ask Musa, Mouin, and Sana, what are your memories of the next turning point, which is 1967, when Israel now expands its borders to include the refugee camps, such as the one in which Musa grew up and Arwa grew up? What are your memories of 67?
Okay, well, I've fairly weak memories of 67. I was, I think, 3 years old at the time, and actually happened to be in Damascus visiting relatives when the war broke out. And my older brother remembers it reasonably well. Apparently, we spent the war in a basement because Damascus itself was being bombed. And then later, my uncle, who was at the time serving in the Syrian military, as all Palestinians in Syria did, took us somewhere to northern Syria, I believe a town named Bludan. And from there, we left Syria from Holland. My memories of 67 are more marked what came afterwards. As you may know, the Israelis made extensive use of napalm during that war. And for whatever reason, a number of victims of Israeli use of napalm ended up in hospitals in the Netherlands. And every weekend, my parents would take my brother and myself on hospital visits to go visit these victims. And I've quite clear memories of that. And then, my other memories, of course, are more related to the aftermath of the 67 war, the rise of the Palestinian guerrilla movement, its very rapid emergence in Jordan and then Lebanon. But that, I think, is for another chapter. So I'll stop there.
Sana, what's your memory of 67? I know you're going to say you were not yet.
I wasn't born. No. Actually, I have very, very vague memory on the 1967. I remember that we used to paint our light bulbs with blue colors so that the planes don't see the light coming. This is what I remember in 1967 in Lebanon. And of course, I remember my parents on the TV day and night watching the news and listening to Nasser speaking. This is, I remember very vividly. But like Mouin said, the memories I still keep is the emergence of the Fidaiyin and the PLO later on, where everybody, I think, of my father's family were very much involved in the PLO.
And Musa?
Yes,
I'll just say briefly and then let you do the talking. Musa often tells the story that between 1948 and 1967, his father managed to become the richest person in Fawar camp. He was the richest person in Fawar camp. And the main consequence of 1967 for his father and his family was his father went from the richest person in Farwar camp to the poorest. So you
Yeah,
know
yes.
the rest of the story.
Yes, I was, a bit older than Mouin and maybe Sana. I was 12 years old when, the war broke out. And although I was, young, but, my father had a shop and, everyone, gathered in his shop listening to Abdel Nasser. And, my father also hanged, the two missiles, Egyptian missiles called Dapper and Qahar on his window shop. And, I still remember the words of Ahmed Said, the Egyptian,
Okay.
شو بسموه
Radio announcer.
radio announcer, yeah. And threatening that they would, throw the Israelis in the sea, and so it was the biggest shock I had, when in 6 days I didn't believe that the Israelis, and we were lied, by the Jordanian soldiers who, said that the Egyptian army, occupied Palestine, and to the last minute, and it was, the biggest shock. I will never, forget, that shock. When the Israelis came, to the camp and to Hebron, throwing the sweets to the people. This is one thing, but as Norman said, the personally, the 1967 war destroyed our family. The Israelis, confiscated all the cloth and of my father's, his business, and so from the richest, father to the poorest father, and my father, because he was rich, he was married to another wife, and we were many. We are now, maybe you will laugh. We are 27 brothers and sisters. So he couldn't keep up with life, and I remember, I remember how I was, the son of the richest man in the area, not only in the camp, and the poorest, very quickly, so it was, a very, very, I was born, in 1955, after 1945, 48, but I, lived the experience of the 1967, which, had more impact on me and my brothers and my sisters. I survived because I was the eldest, but my brothers, suffered a lot. They left school early. Many of them are employed because they didn't get their education, university education. I was lucky. I was the eldest, of my brothers and sisters. So I remember also when people started to leave the camp to Jordan, with I don't know, it was they didn't have any connection with the camp. Maybe it would be different if they belonged to a village, their original village, but to the camp, small rooms, like graves built by the UNRWA. So they didn't have any connection to these rooms. So they easily left to Jordan. So my father refused to leave, because he was still rich, in 1967. I think if my father, knew that he would be poor, he would, he would leave. He would have left. But he was stick to his business, but it did not work as he wished. So it was, the very, very bad and sad experience to me and to my family.
Did you have any interactions with Israelis right after 67?
Yeah, I had, many, you mean, friendship with Israelis?
Whatever, any kind of interaction with Israelis.
Yeah, I was, arrested, several times.
Right after 67, you were arrested? No.
No, I was, in the 80s, in the 80s, I was arrested 4 times. Administrative, on administrative basis, with no charges. I had, on the other side, I had, Israeli friends and like Gidon Levy, like later.